under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And our four-way test. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? And Kathy, do we have somebody signed up for the invocation today?
We do, Lynn Megan.
Oh, thank you, Lynn.
You know, I usually, I don't know why, stay away from the invocation. I do everything else in Rotary. But Julie got an opportunity to be with her grandbabies today. So she asked me if I would do that. And guess what? She found the poem, the prayer for me. So this is from Julie Wern. So we miss her today. And she chose this reading as a nod to our speaker, to Kelly, who's a reporter with the Star Trib. So it's about the press. It's called The Power of Written Word and was published in the Huffington Post. For centuries, back a time which probably cannot be traced, the power of written word has saved lives and circulated powerful ideas, preserved traditions and memories, and so much more. Great moments in history have evoked and set a basis for some of the most important values by which we live today. In 1215, the barons of King John created the Magna Carta, a document with such significant early influence on the historical process that it led to the rule of the constitutional law today. It can be argued it is one of the earliest examples of the written word that is extremely relevant to the present day. For hundreds of years, law codes and systems of law have guided citizens through life. And written with the written word, laws would not be enforced efficiently and would get lost in translation. In around 1440, Johann Gutenberg, a German craftsman, developed movable type. This prompted an increase in the desire for knowledge and an increase in literacy throughout Europe. Gutenberg presented a cost-effective way of having one's ideas heard. This created a platform for those innovators and leaders. For example, Martin Luther spread his thoughts for reform, beginning the Protestant Reformation. Galileo Galilei, an Italian scientist, used the power of the written word to spread controversial observations and the space that shattered previous religious theories. In 1848, the first widespread use of telegraph, along with printing presses, led to the reading of public newspapers and broadsheets that could be updated multiple times daily. Now, in the 21st century, the written word is so much more accessible through the internet and social media, which is both good and bad. To end on the good, there is incredible power in the written word, whether it is finding the strength and vulnerability or the importance of expression. A well-written story has the power to resonate the reader. A writer can inspire someone to make a statement, inform of an important story, or highlight a cause that connects with the reader who shares it with others. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Appreciate that. And Kathy, do we have a record reporter for today?
Lauren Swanson.
Oh, thank you very much, Lauren. I appreciate that. We'll look forward to seeing that in the email later. All right. Does anyone have any announcements today? Because I actually do not. Tell you what, let's take a few minutes and do happy dollars. We have not done those for a long time. Let's get some money for Polio Plus and just keep track of what you you're spending here and get it to Kathy next time we're together. Who has some happy dollars?
I'll do one. I was able to take a family vacation last week. We just went up to our family cabin, so there was really terrible internet up there and was really able to step away for a while. But we played badminton in the sunshine one day, and then we ran around in the snow the next day. So it was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Glad you were able to get away.
I have one. We were talking about the weather earlier. Just so everybody knows, I took the snow tires off my wife's car, so we're not going to get any more snow.
Yay.
Okay.
So, well, I got my second shot for COVID 2 weeks ago Friday. So I'm immune now. I got both of them down in Arizona because the Minnesota system froze up after giving me a wonderful appointment months ago. So I 2 hours later, I get a call from my brother down in Arizona saying he thought there was some availability. So when I was down there, I got both vaccinations. I hear a lot of snowbirds are doing that in Florida or Arizona, and they can't get in their own state.
Yeah, I was able to do that down here in Arizona as well. So that was nice. There'd been a little bit of pushback from some of the natives, if you will, who said these snowbirds are taking away our vaccine, but the counter was, but we're an important part of their economy, so they were glad to keep us healthy and out spending money.
Yeah, the governor just asked for extra vaccine for us. He wasn't objecting.
Does anybody else have happy dollars? Well, I'll do one. I am a rabid gardener, and I started some seedlings way too early, but they're doing well. Every day it's above 50. They have to go outside and get toughened up, and yesterday was a good wind workout for them. So hopefully I will have some things to share with our YMCA garden too.
Deb, I have a happy dollar, actually a happy $5. I've been working pretty much full time the last 2 months because my co-worker who was not retired, and I'm the retired guy at the school district, was out with a knee replacement. So I've been starting school every 2 weeks. First, we started the first graders and kindergartners, and then 2 weeks later, the second and third graders, and 2 weeks later, the fourth through sixth graders, and 2 weeks later, the seventh through ninth graders. And today we started the 12th up to 12th grade. So it's like starting school for 2 months solid instead of September. And today Jim came back to work. So the newest changes are for him to do. And I get to kind of sit back and maybe join Rotary again.
We have missed you, so welcome back. We knew you were treading water pretty hard there.
Some days my nose was just above it.
Are the
So what's
teachers able to get vaccinated?
I've had one shot. I'm getting my second one on Thursday.
So I'll give $10 just to thank John for
Oops, you got muted, Tom, right in the middle there.
So I'll do $10 to thank Jan for helping get our kids back in school.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Aldo.
I'll do
Hi
the
everyone.
same.
This is
Hi, Maria.
Hi everyone. This is Maria. Jan, thank you so much for getting all those kids back to work. And I guess that I will also contribute $5 towards Happy Dollars. I have been working very hard in a grant for the Dominican Republic, so and I've been doing some traveling back and forth, and I am grateful that I am healthy and I have work to do. So thank you.
It's nice to see you too, Maria. We really appreciate you being here and all that you're doing.
I'll
Yeah,
go along with Tom and give $10 for getting those kids back in school.
Well,
I'll
please.
give the $10 also for getting the kids back in school.
Thank you, George. All right, anybody else? Well, Madam President-elect Jenny Hedal, would you do us, oh, wait a minute. Wait, you, hold on. Kathy, do you have the history picture? Almost forgot that one. There it is. This is not terribly long ago. Ted, would you take just a moment to describe this history picture?
Sure, happy to, Deb. This was Angela in there in front and myself in Uganda at the Nakavali. At the time, it was the ARC headquarters in the refugee settlement. And we had gone over there. You see the suitcases in the back? Those were courtesy of Days for Girls. And so we were there to, in this case, we're starting to distribute the packets for the young girls and women there at the ARC Center, as you can see in the background. And anytime any of us show up, there's always a big crowd around, especially the little kids. You see all the boys sitting in the back there as well. But that's what's going on. And I guess that was probably what, 2018, 17? I don't know if you
Sounds
know,
about
Deb.
right, yeah.
That's my guess.
This was also my first attempt at putting the Rotary words and whatnot under there for a photo contest. So that was kind of fun.
And
Thank you, Kathy.
I think we took 10 suitcases
It was
of the bags with us that time.
it was quite a task.
Yep.
All right, now, Ms. Hedal, may I turn it over to you?
Yeah, I got the pump fake the first time. You bet. Love to introduce Kelly Smith. Kelly covers nonprofits and philanthropy for the Star Tribune, as you heard. And since 2010, she's covered Greater Minnesota on the state region team, Hennepin County Government, West Metro Suburban Government, and West Metro K-12 Education. So she was born in Duluth, grew up in the Twin Cities, graduated from the College of St. Benedict's, and was also worked in Fargo for a little bit too before coming to the Star Tribune. So Kelly, love to have you here today.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm gonna share my screen here. I've been on a little Rotary circuit the last few weeks. I was at the Edina Rotary Club last week? I think it was. And they met in person, which is the first time I've been meeting in person since the pandemic started. So that was quite a bizarre situation to see humans in person. So I'm a reporter with the Star Tribune, and I cover nonprofits. I actually did a story about a year ago on Days for Girls. So interesting that you guys just mentioned that organization. And so I'm here to chat a little bit about how journalists work, and then a little bit about social media. So if we were here in person, I would ask you if you read the Star Tribune or read newspapers in general. But even if you don't read the Star Tribune or don't read local newspapers, chances are you maybe have a Facebook account or are on social media or on the internet. And as Lynn mentioned earlier, the internet has been a great tool for all of us, but it's sort of the wild, wild west of information. And so sometimes it's hard to know if the information that you're seeing online is true or not. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. The pictures here are from our newsroom, which we're located in downtown Minneapolis in the Capella Tower. And our newsroom shut down last March. I think it was March 15th or around then. And so we've been working mostly remotely since then. I haven't been back there myself. So that's the first time in 150 years that we've been putting out a newspaper every single day, completely remotely. We're staffed 365 days of the year. My friends are always surprised to find out that I'm working on a holiday, but the news never stops. So our newsroom is usually staffed, even though we're remotely now, but is usually staffed about almost 24 hours a day. So we have someone there ready to cover whatever breaking news there is. I just like to bring this up because a lot of people use the phrase the media, and it's kind of this monolithic phrase that can be very vague and doesn't mean a whole lot. So when people talk about the media, are they talking about podcasts or tabloids or late night cable news networks? So if you watch CNN or Fox News at night, those are commentary. Those are people who are paid to give analysis and their opinions. So that's not necessarily objective news. And so I just like to say that, today I'm here talking about local newspapers, and we follow very different ethical standards than other media organizations that you might follow. So I'll just give you an example. A couple years ago when Prince died, who was the first news outlet to report his death? Does anyone know? I'll just give the answer. It was TMZ. So TMZ, hopefully you would understand that TMZ and tabloids have different standards than the Star Tribune does. But just to explain that, they can pay thousands of dollars to ambulance drivers or jail workers to get information, and they don't have to list their sources. So they just announced Prince had died. At the Star Tribune, we need to actually have sourcing confirming that information. So we had to actually go through law enforcement and have an actual source to report that information before we reported it. And we never pay sources for information. So if I interview you, we aren't paying you for that interview. If we're using a photo that you took, we wouldn't pay you for that. We get information organically through the community. A good example of this too is our restaurant critic. So before COVID hit, he reviewed usually about 250 restaurants each year in the Twin Cities and across Minnesota. We pay for every single one of those meals. We don't get a free meal in exchange for a review of a restaurant. And, of course, on Instagram or other social media platforms, people will post pictures of a meal that maybe they got for free because that's the relationship that they had with that restaurant. So that's very different from what journalists do. Here are some of our notable front pages over the years. So the Star Tribune started in 1867. We were incorporated the same year that Minneapolis became a city, which is kind of cool, little local history here in Minnesota. We're older than the Boston Globe, the LA Times, and the Washington Post, which is kind of a cool fact. And obviously we're older than a lot of other Minnesota-based companies like Target and Best Buy. So a lot of people ask us how the front page is decided each day. So these are kind of the anomaly newspapers. These are, for big front page news. But on a typical day, there's usually 5 stories on the front page, and 4 are usually local Minnesota-based stories. So we also pay to publish stories from the New York Times, Washington Post, and the Associated Press. So we have 2 reporters in Washington, D.C. who cover Minnesota's congressional delegation. We also have 3 reporters up in Duluth that cover Duluth news, and we just started a St. Cloud bureau with 1 reporter there. But we don't cover the president or the president's administration per se. We only cover Minnesota's congressional delegation. So anything about the president or about national news like that will come from the New York Times, the Washington Post, or the Associated Press. But usually the rest of the stories on the front page are local news stories. A lot of people ask how the paper comes together each day. So I'm a beat reporter, and as I mentioned, my beat is nonprofits. So as beat reporters, we often develop sourcing. So when I started the beat, I went out and I met with 50 different nonprofit experts throughout the community to try to understand the nonprofit sector. So I wasn't writing a story for any of those 50 meetings. I was just trying to understand the sector, the different challenges facing nonprofits in Minnesota, and developing sourcing so that people would tip me off to different news. I get a lot of press releases. We cover city councils, school boards, to try to mine for different story ideas there in communities. Once we write a story, it goes to our editor who edits it, looks for typos or errors, or tries to smooth out the writing. Then it goes to our copy desk where the page designer puts it on the page. And the copy editor goes through and fact checks to make sure all the names are spelled correctly and make sure that we have those key facts correct. They also write the headlines and the cut lines. And then it goes to our printing press in the North Loop around 10:30. And we actually do free tours of our printing press before COVID and hopefully after COVID. If you're interested, it's really fascinating. It's like Disneyland for journalists, seeing the robots carry these massive rolls of paper around the printing press, and pretty cool to see the presses in action. So people often don't know that we have two different editions, one that goes to Greater Minnesota and one to the Twin Cities. So this often plays out with sports coverage or on election night when the polls close at 8 p.m. in Minnesota. A lot of times we don't know the results. And my first deadline is usually 8:30 or 9 that I have to write a story. So we'll write a story saying, Roseville City Council had an election. Here were the people that ran. We don't know the results, and that's the version that goes to Greater Minnesota. And then we have about an hour to update the Twin Cities version, and that's just because of the printing presses and the delivery trucks. So if you haven't been following the news at all about what's happening for local newspapers, there is a pretty stark decline for print news in the US and across the world. In the last 15 years, more than 2,000 newspapers across the US have closed or merged. And what this means is that a lot of areas throughout the US, especially in rural areas, now have no local news source. So no one's covering their city council, no one's covering what the local police are doing, the court system, your local high school sports, that's all just kind of evaporated. And in Minnesota, just in 2020 alone, 7 newspapers closed, including the Eden Prairie News, the Hastings Star Gazette. I mean, these papers have been around for decades, which was really sad to see the closure of these, important community newspapers. COVID really accelerated the decline for newspapers because newspapers rely on 2 sources for revenue: circulation, which is subscribers, and secondly, advertising. And so when COVID hit, newspaper advertising basically evaporated overnight. And so newspapers suddenly had to rely on their subscribers for support. And you've probably seen that over time, newspapers have tried to rely more on subscribers than advertising, because advertising can be, it has been declining, generally speaking, and so has subscribers. So we're relying more and more on the community to support us. And I just included this, 71% of people surveyed think that newspapers are doing just fine financially, yet 14% support them. And so that shows kind of the disconnect there of local news. And it's great to see there's been a huge surge in support for New York Times and the Washington Post. New York Times, I think, has more than 7 million digital subscribers, and they also have more than 1,600 journalists. And to put that in perspective, the Star Tribune has about 100,000 digital subscribers, and we have 230 journalists. So as our revenue declines, so does the number of journalists, and so does the amount of news that we can cover. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we follow very specific code of ethics. So this is from the Society of Professional Journalists, and you can go on spj.org if you want to read it. This is what most mainstream news organizations would follow. So NPR, WCCO, the Star Tribune, we all follow this code of ethics that talks about how we will be objective and minimize harm in the communities that we're covering. Same with our photographers, the National Press Photographers Association Code of Ethics. So, I cover nonprofits. If I'm writing a story for tomorrow's paper about this new nonprofit program, and I say, hey, could we take a photo of that? And they say, well, there's nothing happening today with this program, but we could have some of our employees, stage a photo to make it look like this program is happening. We would say no, that we don't stage photos. We can't manipulate a photo to happen. It has to be happening organically, whether we're there or not. And so, marketing, internal marketing departments might be able to do that, but we can't as journalists. So we're bound to these ethical standards in journalism. And here are just some of the other key ethical principles that we follow. So like I said, we can't accept gifts or anything in exchange for coverage. When I covered city council meetings and school board meetings, oftentimes they would have, some bottled water or maybe a tray of donuts when it's a 7 a.m. meeting. And I would never take a donut, even though, that is probably worth a very, nominal amount. But the perception of me taking a donut would then affect people's perception of my objectivity if I'm accepting that. So we can't attend political protests or rallies. I can't put a bumper sticker on my car or a yard sign in my yard. We have to keep that objectivity going. We rarely use anonymous sources, which is very different than if you read the New York Times. You might see that they use anonymous sources a little bit more, covering high profile stories, or if it's covering a foreign war or something like that, where it's really sensitive. But at the Star Tribune, we have to get approval from all of our top editors to use an anonymous source. I've probably used 1 or 2 in the last 10 years, so it's very unusual. And basically, there's no other way to tell the story, and you have to know who that person is. So we're not meeting people in a dark parking garage to interview them who is anonymous. We have to know who that person is so that I can verify their identity and that they are who they are. And we do issue corrections. So anytime I have a story where I have the wrong name spelled or any sort of factual error that's wrong, we have to publish a correction in the next day's print issue, which is on the second page of the paper, and correct that online. I'm sure most of you know the difference between opinion and news, but we do have a separate editorial section, and their pictures are listed there. So they are run completely independent and separate from the newsroom. I have no idea what is in tomorrow's opinion and editorial section until I open up the paper, just like all of you. So they are completely separate from us. I know I'm running out of time, so I'm going to go really quickly. We also have opinion columnists in each of our sections. So news, sports, and business have opinion columnists, and they're designated by their headshot. They can give analysis, commentary, or first person that I can't as a reporter.
Kelly, we don't end till 1, so we just need a few minutes.
Oh, okay.
Before that, so you don't have to.
Well, feel free to break me in if I am going too far over, but I have just a few slides left and then we can take some questions. So ads, again, you guys are probably well versed in what the difference is between ads and news content, but the next generation, a lot of students don't know this. There was a survey done of students in, I think, Stanford, and 80% of students thought sponsored content was news content. And it's really just a euphemism for advertising. So if you see that in print or online, that's paid advertising. So that's all I'm going to talk about journalism. I'm just going to switch over now to social media or the internet. So if you are getting any information from the internet or social media, how do you verify that that is true? So here are some tips from librarians who, like journalists, like to make sure that accurate information is out there. So you want to consider the source. You want to check the author. So, on the Star Tribune, if you came across a link and you had never heard of the Star Tribune, how could you make sure that this is an actual real site? So you could check to make sure there's bylines. Do they actually state who wrote this story? And then you could Google Tim Harlow and you could see that he's an actual human in Minnesota writing these stories. You could verify his identity. You would check the date, because a lot of times stories go viral years later for maybe some political reason. And so it's important to know when that story was originally published. Obviously, reading behind the headlines is important because people oftentimes just read the headline and don't understand the rest of the context. If I was clicking on a link to a story in Virginia, I'm not familiar with all the Virginia news organizations there. So I see this link, I click on it, And I have no idea if this is just a political partisan website or if this is an actual news organization. So I would look to see, do they also list their corrections policy? Do they list their own policies and standards? Click the About section and see who is behind this organization. Do they list who their leaders are? Who is funding this organization? And then you want to look in their articles. Are they interviewing multiple people, multiple sources? I mean, that's part of what makes credible journalism, is that you're not just spitting out press releases. You're actually interviewing people with multiple sources. So those are some things that I would look for if I'm trying to make sure a website is accurate. If you're on social media, there's lots of photos and videos being shared every single day. How do you tell what is real? So just to define it, misinformation is false information that someone believes is true, but they're sharing it. And disinformation is intentionally designed to mislead you. So misinformation obviously happens a lot more because people just don't realize what they're sharing is inaccurate. So during 2020, the fires in Australia that happened, lots of photos were being shared of the devastation there. If I came across these photos on Twitter or Instagram, there are a couple red flags here. First of all, on the left, people are calling out on the comments, this looks photoshopped. And that may not mean that they're photoshopped, but that's definitely a red flag to me. On the right, you can see that the person, you can see the timestamp that they are tweeting from Texas. So as a journalist, I always want to find primary sources, not secondary sources. You may remember learning about that in school. So primary sources, I want the person who actually witnessed something. So if I'm out covering a fire in Rsvl, I want to interview a witness who actually saw the fire, not someone on Facebook Live who saw the fire. I want the actual sources. I want people who knew the family that lived in that house who can talk to me about them, not someone second or third hand. And so on social media, if you're seeing posts like that, where someone is sharing a photo or a video and they're not there, that should be a red flag as well. Again, not 100% certainty that they're sharing misinformation, but that's definitely a red flag. So that you can message the person directly and say, did you take this photo or did you take this video? You can check out their profile and see if they actually live in Minnesota. If they're sharing Minnesota information. You can reverse Google image photos to see if they show up somewhere else and that this person is just trying to amplify that. And you would find out that these are indeed, the first one is photoshopped. And the second one is a fire in Australia, but it's from 2013. So it's not from 2020. And this is just to show you that misinformation is not always malicious. So they're not asking you to wire them money. They're not asking you to support someone in Russia. They're just trying to increase awareness, presumably, about these fires in Australia. So there's nothing hopefully malicious going on. It's just misinformation that's spreading. And the same happened during COVID. When the shutdown happened last March, there were all these viral images of animals kind of coming back after humans were in lockdown, right? And so there were these viral images in Venice of swans in the canals and dolphins in the canals. And again, they were being shared all over the world, and they are also part of misinformation. And so National Geographic contacted this woman in India who had tweeted this viral photo of swans in the Venice canals. Again, she's in India, she's not in Venice, so that should be a red flag. And she got, thousands and thousands of retweets. Turns out that the swans are not unusual to be in the Venice canals. They're always there. And those dolphins were photographed hundreds of miles away in a different port. And so when National Geographic contacted the woman, they said, why did you keep this up? This is misinformation. And she said, well, she had never gotten so many likes and retweets, so she didn't want to take it down. So people are doing this all across the internet where they're sharing information and they're getting lots of likes, and it's not maybe their photo to share, or it's part of misinformation. And so you can see if misinformation can spread this quickly over sort of harmless photos of cute animals, how quickly it can spread if it's more, harmful information. The News Literacy Project is a national nonprofit, and if you go to newslit.org, they have a ton of great resources. So just doing a plug for them, they have a quiz you can take online to test how news literate you are, and see if you get duped by any of this kind of information. And they have lots of tips like this about how to spot misinformation. And their big takeaway is if you have internet access or you have a social media account, it's incumbent on each of us as individuals to verify information before you share it, before you like it, because you could be amplifying misinformation and you may not know that. And so, before the internet, we all read the same newspapers or listened to the same radio shows, or we watched the same TV news, and we had kind of a basic set of facts. Now with the internet, it's this wild, wild west of information. So it's up to each of us to do that fact checking before we share it. So that takes extra work, obviously, but that's sort of our duty now with the internet and social media. So here are some great tips from them, and that's all I have. So there's my contact info. If anyone has questions, I'm willing to take any of them right now. Otherwise, you can contact me at any point too.
Well, thank you very much, Kelly. I learned a bunch here. If you have questions, would you please either press your hand raising button or wave somehow to get our attention?
Hi, this is Ted. I have a question.
Go ahead, Ted.
Thanks very much, Kelly, for a fascinating presentation. Gives us a lot to think about as well, and how to be aware of information. I was interested in your definition of misinformation and disinformation. But my question is about your own beat, as you said, that you work for nonprofits, or your beat is nonprofits. How do you decide nonprofit? I mean, you were also talking about city councils and other things. So I assume you're talking about people on different beats from what you were sharing in general, but how do you define nonprofit?
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, I was referencing, I used to cover K-12 education and city councils in the West Metro and Hennepin County Board. So yeah, I was just referencing generally those other anecdotes from other beats. But yeah, as a nonprofit reporter, I cover registered 501c3s with the IRS. So, but I also cover philanthropy. So it could be, that broadens it a little bit because it could be a community fundraiser or other elements too. But generally, like probably 95% of my coverage is about 501c3s.
All right, we'll take Lynn next, and then we will do David Gilberstad, then Jim Oslin, then Lauren Swanson. So Lynn, go ahead.
And my question follows up Ted's as well. So thank you so much. I'm running a nonprofit. So what's a good storyline? So what's a good something that I could make contact with you about?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I spoke at a Minnesota Council of Nonprofits event maybe a year or two ago. And so first of all, what is news? What is newsworthiness, right? So newsworthiness is something that is new or different or unique. And so as a reporter, I get, I don't even know, maybe 20 or 30 press releases a day, and almost all of them I don't cover. So, it could be a nonprofit saying, can you write a story about us existing? And, that's great that you exist, but that's not news. So I'm looking for new programs, new efforts, new solutions at addressing issues, whether it's like homelessness, or during COVID, I've been covering a lot about food insecurity and food shelves and the hunger crisis in Minnesota. So those are kind of the keywords I'm looking for. Is new. It's a new program. We're opening a new building. So those are probably the key issues that make it a newsworthy story. We get a lot of pitches too of saying, can you write about our 5th annual 5K walk? We're not going to cover that because there are millions of 5K walks. So there has to be some unique element in it. As a reporter, I'm often, when I'm covering nonprofits, I'm looking to see if I can tie it into a broader trend. So even if you don't care about this one nonprofit and what they're doing, how does it link to something broader? So, if it's a homelessness prevention program, this is what this nonprofit just launched this new program. And I can link it to the fact that there's been growing homelessness in Minnesota, and other nonprofits are trying to find new ways to address this issue too.
Thank you very much. All right, David Gilberstedt, and then we'll do Jim Osland after this.
Yeah, in the past, newspapers tend to have kind of a monopoly over their local area. In Twin Cities, there was both a St. Paul and Minneapolis paper, plus there's local suburban ones. There can be some disadvantages to that, but what it tended to do, since the newspapers were depending on subscribers and more importantly, ad revenue, they wanted to keep from alienating either constituency. So they would tend to be sorted down the middle. They might be a little bit to the right or a little bit to the left, but they were going after the bell-shaped curve in order to get the maximum readership. And that tended to, and it was an edited news source. So you got a pretty good source of news. Now, I mean, you mentioned, for instance, determining whether something's a true news item. Is it a joke? Well, for God's sakes, how many people are supporting QAnon right now? That had to originally be a joke. I mean, it's so absurd. But you got people taking it more seriously. Also, you showed those news deserts. The more of a news desert is, the more it seems to be in one of those areas that's voting very far out. And so is there any suggested improvement on the situation? There can't be a remedy, I suppose, but does anybody have any ideas? And, are the newspapers going to survive as one source? And if not, who then?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of great things that you just said. So, journalism researchers have looked at this topic of news deserts and found that in communities where a newspaper closes and there's no other news source, oftentimes communities might start Facebook pages, but it's not going to give you that all-encompassing information about your city council, your school board, and all of that information. And they found that in communities where papers closed, fewer people voted, fewer people ran for election beyond incumbents, and that bond spending increased in municipalities, perhaps because there was less transparency or less eyes watching how they were spending their money. So there are real costs associated with the loss of newspapers. In Minnesota, there's been a huge increase in nonprofit news. So if like MinPost is probably the most well-known organization. So that's been a trend across the US, which is great to see. And there have been, other community, I referenced Eden Prairie News closed, and a group of Eden Prairie residents banded together and decided to start their own news organization. So that's fantastic. I think it's also a nonprofit. So hopefully in the face of some of this bleak news of closures, newspapers that have been around since the late 1800s are closing. Hopefully new things pop up with journalists and credible journalism folks behind it. Otherwise, you're going to have just Facebook groups like you referenced spouting perhaps conspiracy theories that nobody fact checks, which is obviously very dangerous in a democracy. So, our publisher has always said, well, first of all, that print still matters to us. So unlike other newspapers in Minnesota that have gone completely online only, we are still dedicated to print. So we still have a heavy focus on print and on digital. So we're trying to do kind of both, talk, while chewing gum or whatnot. But yeah, the big trend is that newspapers close and they move online only. And whether people have this idea that anything on the internet is free, which hate to break it to you, but nothing is free. So even if you have a Facebook account, I mean, you probably have read those stories where your information, that's not free. Your information could be sold. So hopefully we can help educate the next generations that supporting news is not free and that it's important. And hopefully, you know, I've talked to some of my friends who are millennials about supporting news of any kind. So I don't care if you don't subscribe to the Star Tribune, but hopefully you support NPR or you support one of these nonprofit news organizations. So as long as you're supporting some sort of local news, I think is really important. Did I answer your questions?
We've got 4 more questions here. So we'll do Jim Osland next and then Lauren.
Hi, Kelly. I'd like to echo Ted's comments. A very interesting presentation. I'm a dinosaur. I try to read three different newspapers a day. My question is, I will see what I consider pretty significant variances in the headlines and in the stories from the 3 different newspapers. I'd just like to get your comments on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know without looking at specific headlines what exactly are different. You know, I cover nonprofits, so
Yeah,
you know, it's hard to, you know, my headlines are usually pretty straightforward. A nonprofit has started a new program. There's not really much how to write that headline in a different way. Is there a specific example that
there's one today. It's about the even the rail deal with the Canadian Pacific. The Tribune's in comparing that to the Wall Street Journal, there's quite a bit of difference. And it's obviously different viewerships that their readerships they're going after, but I always find it curious to see the variance.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't write that headline, so I can't speak to that one specifically. I think, you know, David mentioned having readerships that are perhaps more liberal or versus conservative. You know, I always bristle at that because like I said, I'm an objective reporter. So our opinion section you may find is liberal or conservative. I've heard all the nicknames that there are about the Star Tribune. You know, I covered the 2018 midterm elections on our politics team, and I was blasted by both sides. I showed up at a Dean Phillips supporting party and they said, we don't want you here. You work for the Star Tribune, which is owned by Glenn Taylor, a former Republican, and you endorsed Eric Paulson, which they meant to say our opinion section had endorsed Eric Paulson in a previous election. And I said, well, I explained the difference between the opinion section and the news section. And I explained that Glenn Taylor probably has no idea who I am and he has no bearing on our coverage. So, you know, that to me isn't a factor. And then, you know, I went over to Eric Paulson's supporters and wrote a story, and they also blasted me for the opposite reasons. So
we do have 3 more questions.
Yeah.
So we'll do Lauren and then Ane and then Tom. So Lauren.
First of all, with regard to the free news sources, I kind of like the adage that says, if you aren't paying for the service you're getting, you are the product. And I thought that was an interesting one. But my question is, one of the chief debunkers that I have used in the past is Snopes. How much credibility do you put in Snopes?
That's a good question. I don't actually go there very much because it's not related to my beat. So I don't think I could speak authoritatively on that. But I love that people are fact checking information, and that's a fantastic. I think the more fact checkers out there are good.
Thank you for at least being honest about that.
All right, Ane.
First, thank you for really a great informative presentation. I have this journalist background, so I was really interesting to listen through your presentation. And especially, you know, in the time fake news is dominating the world, really we need that kind of information to, you know, fact check all this fake news that's dominating the social media and really controlling the world right now. You just don't know which picture is right, you know, true, which news is, you know, authentic. it's very hard to differentiate. And thank you really for providing that information. And my question is, you said you cover new program of nonprofits. When you say like new program, is that only locally, or you also cover like international? I work for international nonprofit organization also. I kind of own my own, and I just would like to know like what kind of new program that is like can be interested to attract your attention. Thank you.
Yeah, so we cover Minnesota organizations or Minnesota connections to organizations. So if you work for an international nonprofit that's based in Minnesota, that might be a way that we would cover it, or something that affects Minnesotans. Yeah, we're Minnesota organizations, so we're always focused on Minnesota related news. But our threshold is a little different than other news organizations. So if you were pitching a story to, I'm trying to think of another good example. MSP magazine might have a different threshold than we do for a news story. Maybe they would cover something more featurey, whereas I'm a news reporter, so I'm covering something that's a little bit more of a news story, like this program just launched this week, that kind of thing. But I can put my contact info in the chat too if people want to reach out with story ideas. I'll just throw that.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take one last question, and then we will close out the meeting. And then are you able to stay just a little bit longer afterwards? Okay,
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
we're going to end with Tom.
Thank you. Kelly, a sense that I have is that there's a fair number, and let me just say that I would guess there's 10% of the news articles will refer to something that has been, how do I want to say it, they talk about it spiraling out on social media. And it just seems to me that the news organizations are a little bit falling into a trap of accepting something that's big on social media that still may be a relatively small kind of an issue or topic.
I totally agree with you. I'm on Twitter, and I am constantly reminding my editors that not the whole world isn't on Twitter. And so something that gets a lot of traction on Twitter may not be a reflection of the average Minnesotan, what they care about. So I totally agree with you that the number of likes or retweets is not indicative of local interest by any means. And just like the same as the number of likes or retweets doesn't indicate if something's true or not, which I think people inflate that if something's been retweeted a million times or liked a million times, that must mean it's accurate, and that's not true either.
They're not standardized polls like we should count on. So thank you.
All right, well, thank you so much. This has been very interesting, and we've had great questions too. Just interestingly enough, my son works for a company that refurbishes the rollers that go in the big printing presses. So
wow,
he's been busy lately. Thank you for being here. If you have questions, everybody can stay on a little bit after the meeting. Jenny, are you able to tell us who we can look forward to hearing from next week?
Yep, next week we have Charles Goldstein, and his presentation is called Raising the Curtain for Your Second Act. So the theme of his speech is about how individuals can reevaluate their career paths and successfully seek a position that's more akin to their calling.
Wow, that sounds interesting. So everybody think about somebody that you might know who is interested in taking another look, and invite them to join us. All right, I'm going to call the meeting to close here, and thank you all for being here. Feel free to say if you have more questions for Kelly. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.